Welcome, everyone. This is the Behavior Management webinar with the Berkeley Accessible Music Study Group. I am Vicky Laricia. I am faculty at Berkeley in the Accessible Arts Education Institute, and I'm also a special education teacher. I teach middle school special education in one of the local public school districts near Boston. Um, and I am not a classically trained musician, but I am a musician. And I have a history of teaching music to autistic students and working in the private lessons program as a consultant at Berkeley. Um, been with the school for a very long time. Um, So that's a little bit about me. I'm going to now share my screen so you can see my slides. If at any moment you want to say anything at all, I would love that because this is going to be a lot of me talking. Um, so I believe you can hit the raise hand button. If you want, I can unmute you and you can speak, or you can just use the chat and I hopefully will be able to see any of your comments or questions along the way. And also, before we start, one more thing. I imagine we should have a break in the middle. So this is scheduled for 3 hours. So I'm thinking like an hour and 15 minutes. We'll take a break, and then we will resume. So I'm going to keep my eye on the time. So that would bring us to about 2:20. Loading. Oop. All right. Just a moment. My computer's going a little bit slow here. I apologized. Um, okay, so behavior management. Um, I am curious, since we are such a small group, in the chat, can you just say what your role is? That will help me sort of cater a little bit to the people that are here, like what you teach, what grade levels, experience with disability. If you don't mind, that would be lovely. Um, because as a middle school special education teacher, I have had a lot of experience with challenging behaviors. And I'm curious about your roles to see what experience you have had. Um, yeah, behavior is an interesting thing. And I say that because it's not always so cut and dry managing just behavior because we are, as humans, we're all very complex, and we're going to go more into the difference between like anxiety or emotional related behaviors and like oppositional behavior. Looking at the chat now. Oh wow, great. Okay, thank you for sharing that in the chat. Okay, so yes, what I was saying is it's not so cut and dry that like here's a behavior and this is what we do. There's this whole process that we have to follow in order to kind of parse out the best intervention for that specific student. And at the end is when I'm going to talk about this difference between what's an emotionally based behavior and what is a behavior that has a little bit of an element of choice to it, and the way that we treat those is very different. Um, so going forward, everything I'm going to teach you about is behaviors that don't really have that emotional piece to it, like anxiety or anger, or any sort of regulation, emotional regulation piece. This is more for students who are choosing to behave a certain way because they're trying to get something or there's some sort of motivation for it. So we'll start with just what is an overview of managing behavior. We're going to talk about the functions of behavior, taking data and why that's so important. but hard to do, and possible plans, interventions, and tools. And we'll have some time to practice these skills. And then, like I said, we'll end with the difference between treating emotions and managing behaviors. That all being said, if you work within the K to 12 environment, some behaviors are a lot more extreme than others. So ones that are really extreme, I imagine that your school, your building has a plan that involves administration getting involved and collaborating with them. So these strategies we're going to talk about are more for behaviors that you can manage within the classroom. Okay, so on this slide, I know there's such a small group of us, but if you wouldn't mind, my apologies, my computer is going very slow when I click on something. I want to kind of brainstorm a list of behaviors you've seen in your students, so like challenging behaviors that you've seen in the classroom, or if you're not working in the classroom, that maybe you've read about or you've studied. So I'm guessing the best way to do this is to type it in the chat, or I can unmute you and we can call out and I'll just type whatever it is that you're saying. So just to recap, we're listing challenging behaviors that you've observed in your students throughout the years. So if you want to, let's see, use the chat, or I can unmute you, either way. Ooh, okay. Thank you, Elizabeth. That's very specific. I love that. So blasting trumpet, like when you're not supposed to be. Okay, and then so Moniz, would you be okay with like off task as a behavior? I can also list challenging behaviors I've seen. Okay, thank you. Like screaming. Hitting. I know this is kind of basic, but there's a method to this madness. Getting all the list of behaviors that we've seen. Throwing things. Thank you. Oop, I can't. Running around the classroom. Seen that. Invading other students' space. So for those that are watching this video later, I'm typing what people are putting in the chat. Not participating. Good one. I had a lot of those students. And this can be extreme behavior. It can be like mild. Doing other work for classes outside of music. That is a very middle school thing. Typing that. Tantrums. Yep. Running out of the room. My watch is like rubbing on my computer. I'm gonna take that off. Sometimes that's called bolting. I'm gonna put that as well. Deflecting when they don't want to do something. Like, is deflecting slash distracting the teacher? Or I don't know if that's what Moniz, that captures your sentiment. Changing the topic. Self-harm. Oh yeah. Let's just do one more, or one or two more. Taking apart their instrument. That's not what we're supposed to be doing. Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing those challenging behaviors, and I hope I didn't trigger anything uh, from past experiences in your classrooms. Oops, spelling of instrument. There we go. Okay, so this is a pretty wide range of behaviors that we have here. In some of these, I don't know the situation at all, but some of these could have an emotional component, like tantrums, for example. But tantrum could also be like a learned behavior. And there might, I mean, it depends on the student. Every student is so unique. Um, but a tantrum could be a full emotional outburst where the student is just really having a hard time regulating, and whatever the antecedent was really just triggered that. So in that case, what I'm going to teach you today would not help. But I have had students that learn have like it's like a learned strategy to get some sort of function, um, and it's almost like it's not a choice per se, but it's something that we can manage and give them alternate strategies to get what it is that they're looking for. Um, Yeah, and sometimes someone in the chat said, I think I have both learned behavior and emotional outbursts. Sometimes they overlap, and that can get really tricky too. Having like the emotional component and the element of choice and trying to get whatever it is that they're looking for, or they're trying to communicate something with you through the behavior, that can get really tricky too. And I'm sorry to say this, but this is not a science, and this is all the stuff I'm going to teach you today. It just takes a lot of practice and a lot of trial and error, a lot of collaboration. Okay, so whenever I think about a student who is struggling behaviorally, I think about like before the behavior and after the behavior. So what can I do proactively before to kind of like prevent the behavior from happening? So this might be obvious, but good reminders. New school year is going to start in September. Collaborate, communicate with the special education teachers before September. Find out who the students are that in the previous year exhibited a lot of behaviors. Learn about them. Learn about what strategies were used in their previous music classes, um, what worked and what didn't work. Are there certain triggers to certain behaviors? I tend to find out who those students are and really put a lot more effort into building relationships with them. I do believe that having good relationships with students that have challenging behavior goes a long way. And just know in the back of your mind that behavior is a form of communication. Like, for whatever reason, the student is not able to express something with words or ask for what they want, um, or they just haven't learned the skill yet to do that. And instead, they're acting out in this other way. Um, that's a huge piece of it. Like, what is it that's going on? Why are they doing that? What's the function here? That's really going to help you design um, an intervention or decide how you're going to react. Which brings me to my next slide. Oh, I should have explained why I have these pictures. So the be proactive is this kid who was like, oh, it's going to rain. I'm going to think ahead and do something before I leave the house. I'm going to bring an umbrella and a raincoat. And then this kid didn't think ahead. This is his reactive strategy is getting all wet. So the consequence of not thinking ahead was him getting wet and being sad. Just kind of a silly thing. Um, but so if we think about a behavior happening in time and then what happens after that, what can we do as the adults? So first thing I always do is I consult with other stakeholders. Who are the other adults that are involved in the student's day? Because I do not want to be making decisions about this by myself. Take data, which I'll show you, determine the function of the behavior, and I will show you how to do that as well. And then after you've taken the data, after you've determined the function, then you can decide what accommodations or interventions are going to be best given this function of the behavior. And whatever you decide, you must follow through and be consistent for a certain amount of time, which again we'll talk about. And don't waver. You want to be as consistent and reliable as possible. And just know that, and you probably already know this, but generally behavior isn't personal. And even if it is, like, these are kids. They're like learning how to be in the world. And it's a safe, to me, like as a middle school teacher, I think, well, at least they're learning this life lesson now in a safe space that is school. And hopefully whatever we do in the school level will help them become adults that can communicate better and regulate in the world. And ultimately just know that sometimes this kind of stuff takes some time. All right. Any questions about that overview? All right. And please ask questions along the way. So I made this kind of like flowchart thing about who do you consult with if you have a student in your class with challenging behavior. So to me, as a special education teacher, like I would want you to know, like if the student is on an IEP, so this question that's on the left side of the screen, yes, follow like the teal color here. I want to know. Like, I want the music teacher to tell me that something is up in their chorus class or something is up in band. Um, and I want to like work with the music teacher to help them develop a plan. Maybe that student on an IEP in your class has a paraprofessional. Um, so if your paraprofessional is there and they're connected well with the student, definitely talk to them. This other one right here, the BCBA, or Board Certified Behavior Analyst, who might also be called the behaviorist. This is a person who is licensed in behavior management. I do not have this licensure, but I have a behaviorist at my school who has helped me design some really effective plans for students. She's awesome. And if you have one in your building, and you have a student who has some behaviors that just like keep happening, that's a good person to go to. But again, this is not for emotionally related behaviors. This would only be for students that have a little bit of choice. So like sometimes ADHD has some impulsivity components to it. So like that would be behavior that we could be addressed, or autism, sometimes there's some choice components in the challenging behavior. So that could also be a student that the behaviors could help out with. And then if we follow this yes box here down, parents are a really great resource because they know their kid hopefully the best. You can reach out to them. If your school has a guidance counselor or social worker, oh, my guidance counselor and social worker are so helpful, especially with the emotionally related behaviors. I have this dashed line to administration, so it's like your principal or vice principal, because I don't often involve them unless it's like a bullying situation that is like repeated over time, or the behavior is really extreme, like involving someone's rights, like something with racism or sexism or ableism, or there's like physical altercations. So hopefully you have some sort of tiered supports at your school where like, all right, this is administration level behavior. I need to get them involved. So that's kind of the if a student's on an IEP. Who do you talk to? And if they're not on an IEP, in this purpley color here, again, you can talk to the parents, the guidance counselor, administration, and then whoever the classroom teacher is, because they're likely seeing the same behavior in their classes, and maybe they already have a plan that you can just use in your music class. Any questions about that, or anything you want to share, personal experiences? I always say, like, just ask for help. You don't have to go this alone with challenging behavior. Um, I think that's the best first step anytime there's challenging behavior. And if you take away one thing from this webinar, that's the thing. Ask for help. Okay. So finishing up the overview here. Oops, we got something in the chat. Someone says, I have found that my best asset was going to the classroom teacher to see what worked there. Most teachers forget that we are still teachers. I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, definitely. And I personally, as a special ed teacher, again, I would love it if the music teachers came to me with struggles. The guitar teacher at my school does that with one of my students. He'll like text me or call me and say like, oh, your student's really having a hard time. Are you free? Can you come? Um, and that only happens. It doesn't happen frequently, so we didn't have to develop a plan. But I think it's really good to keep those connections with the teachers that see the students more often. I'm guessing that you don't see the students as often as the classroom teacher or the special ed teacher, so definitely connect with them as much as you can. So maybe you've heard this before, but behavior is a form of communication. It could be a sign of some underdeveloped skill, and it always has a function. So if a student's acting out in your class, if you ask yourself, what is my student really trying to tell me? If they had like perfect communication skills, what would they say? Then you can determine what the consequences are, what accommodations or supports they might need to help with that underdeveloped skill, or any intervention that can support them. Okay, so can you just put in the chat if you've ever heard of ABA or applied behavior analysis? So like yes or no, I haven't heard of it. Yes, all right. Okay, so I'm glad both of you have heard of it. I have mixed feelings about ABA. Because many aspects of it I think are not great for humanity. Because for students that require a lot of support, it feels like a very robotic way of teaching. So there are pieces of it that I still use to this day in a way that works for me in the public school. But this is just a quote that kind of explains what ABA is. So I'm not going to read it. I'll just leave it up for a minute for you to read. But ultimately, it's about positively reinforcing the behaviors that we want so that we can change someone's behavior. It feels a little manipulative to me, but I adapted a little. I take pieces of it that work for me, and I will share those with you. Someone says, I feel like ABA goes against neurodiversity affirming teaching strategies. I agree. Absolutely. And I'm glad someone said that because, like, especially with disability, any disability really, like, we don't want to change who people are. Like, that's not the goal. I think ABA kind of has those pieces of it, which I don't agree with. But we do want to create a safe space in the building, your building that you work in, so that all students can access whatever it is that you're teaching. So I only use these pieces when the behavior is just like disruptive or just like so inappropriate or hurting someone's feelings or just like this is not okay. If a student is stimming, self-stimulatory behavior, like that's a calming strategy, right? that's not challenging to me. That's who they are, and go for it. Um, so yeah, take ABA with a grain of salt is my hard my takeaway from that. So on the left, we have strategies that are used for learning, which again, I have some feelings about. Like 20 years ago, I worked in a private school, and this is the way that we taught. Oops, what happened there? Taught the students. I was very young. I'm glad I had that experience, but when it was over, I was like, this is not this is not my favorite way of teaching. So I'm not going to go over what the strategies for learning content are. What we're going to focus on is the strategies for challenging behaviors. So the parts that I like are how ABA kind of breaks up, like there's like 5 functions of behavior. I like that because anytime a student is exhibiting some challenging behavior and I'm like, why do they keep doing that? I'm like, oh, well, the function is for attention, and that really helps me to think, okay, well, if they're trying to get attention, then what can I do to help with that? They also have this ABC, antecedent behavior consequence. So thinking about how time flows, like what happens right before the behavior, what's the behavior, and then what happens right after the behavior, really helps me think about like this cycle of reinforcement and why certain behaviors happen. I like that. And then like taking data. It's hard and time consuming and not always realistic, but if you can get data, that really helps you decide what you're going to do next. And then part of it is that whatever you do next, you have to do it consistently for 2 weeks. You can't do it like sometimes and like only once and expect to change. So whenever these slides get shared with you, I believe that each one of these things is linked to another slide, so you can find it. Okay, so the 5 functions of behavior are on the left side of the screen here. So we have escape from demand or avoidance. You may have heard it called that. Attention seeking, access to tangible, sensory, and physiological. So in my experience, escape from demand and attention are the most common functions of challenging behavior in my middle school students. Escape from demand is just student doesn't want to do the thing. Like maybe they want to do something else. Or maybe it's like too hard or they just don't want to do it. It's boring to them. So what's a possible behavior? Student may tantrum because he does not want to complete his homework. So what is the behavior in this example? What's the challenging behavior? And if you could put it in the chat, or I can unmute you. I can say it. So the challenging behavior is tantrum. And why is the student tantruming? Well, they don't want to complete their homework. Maybe that has worked in the past. And maybe a parent was just tired and was like, fine, don't do your homework. And this is a learned behavior. Well, if I tantrum, I don't have to do the thing. Instead of communicating what the real problem is, like, I don't have the energy to do it. Oops. 1 second. Go back. There we go. Or maybe it's too hard, or whatever the reason is. Many of us don't want to be doing homework, so I sympathize with that. The second, and this is one of the trickiest functions, especially if the attention is from peers, and we can talk more about that later, but the student wants to gain attention. It can be positive or negative attention from others. So here's an example. A student may throw his instrument because the consequence may entail negative attention from teachers and peers. Maybe they like that. I think I'm like accidentally pressing something. Sorry about that. The slides are going back and forth. So here our behavior is throwing an instrument, which is a challenging behavior, and it's not really appropriate. And why is the student doing it? Well, the whole class erupts in some sort of attention, negative attention for that. And I'm sure the teacher might react to it as well. I mean, I would, and that's what the student is looking for. Um, Access to tangible is common, but not as common in my experience as the first two. So this means the student just wants an item. They want uh, maybe they want to play a game on the iPad, or maybe they want some food. So what's the example? A student may get out of a seat frequently to play with another instrument. So what's the behavior there? Getting out of their seat. And what's the function? Well, they're trying to access this tangible. They want to get to the instrument and play it. It's not necessarily that they're trying to escape from demand, whatever the demand is at the time. They just want this other thing. So sensory, you might see that with some students with autism. So the student may be experiencing sensory overload or stimulation, or maybe they're like sensory seeking. The example, a student may scream when the other musicians are warming up their instruments loudly. So the sensory overload of the warming up in the auditory processing might be too much. So by screaming, it kind of drowns out that sound. I have a student, an eighth grader, who he has such an interesting sensory profile, but he'll make like there's a couple things he does that, and this isn't these aren't challenging behaviors at all. I think screaming is can be challenging because it can be disruptive, and perhaps the student is like really suffering, and we want to help that student manage that sensory overload. This other student, the student of mine, like sometimes he'll make these really loud sounds, and I'm just laughing because I have these memories with him. But he'll do like ew, like EWWW, completely randomly, and I don't think he really understood that it has a meaning. Like when someone says ew, it's they're saying something's gross. But he later was able to explain, like, no, Miss Laricia, I just like the way that sound feels. When I say it loud, it feels like it just feels good. And so I tried to help him find some other sound that doesn't have as much of a meaning to it. Because he'll say it when a kid is talking about something totally mundane, and the kid's like, "What? Why are you saying ew to that?" So I gave him like some other way to respond, and then this other thing he's been doing, and I'm not. He's also very attention seeking, so I don't really respond to it. Is he kind of like twists up his face real tight, like he makes this really tight facial expression, and part of that is that he just is learning facial expressions and what they mean, and another part is I think he just likes that tightness. So that's a very sensory. There's a sensory function for that. I don't see that as a challenging behavior at all, so I wouldn't do anything about it. But just know that there are other behaviors that might have a sensory purpose. And last is physiological function of behavior. So maybe there's some sort of pain internally or discomfort internally that's happening. Also, middle school hormones, that is physiological. So maybe a student has a headache and they hit their head, and that's a form of self-harm, and that is challenging. So we need to figure out a way to address that. How can we alleviate the pain or find a different behavior that's going to help the student feel better so that they don't hurt themselves when they hit their head? Okay, I'm going to pause there. What questions do you have about the functions of behavior, and are there any behaviors you have observed where you feel like, oh yeah, the function of this behavior was definitely attention or avoidance? Please share in the chat if you would like. Someone wrote, the student that you were talking about made me think differently about one of my students. I hope a positive thinking, positive difference. And someone else wrote, I feel like this is the hardest thing for newer teachers to learn. Behaviors don't come from nowhere. This is a helpful chart. Well, thank you. Yeah, there is a reason. I don't think like, I've never thought of this before, but I don't think humans just behave in any way for no purpose. For no purpose. Like everything we do has a reason, right? I feel like we're getting into some philosophical conversation here, but and again, if you want me to unmute you to speak more about anything, just I don't know if you have the option to request that, um, or maybe you have to put it in the chat. I don't know. All right, we'll go on to the next slide, and if anything comes up, let me know. Okay. Oop, chat. Okay. So someone else says he loves to look at books and lately has been reading certain phrases really loudly. I thought he was attention seeking, but maybe it is a sensory thing. Yeah, maybe. I'm so curious about that. Also, this is a complete side note, and I don't know. I mean, I've been in this role where I am right now for 12 years, and I was a para for like 6 or 7 years before that. So I've been working with kids with autism for a long time. And this student that I'm telling you about, or that I was telling you about, the sensory one, um, he's always talking. He'll just come into my classroom and just be talking. And I'm like, oh, are you talking to me? If you're talking to me, like, get my attention first, like, what do you want to say? And he's been with me for 2 years, and I'm like, that sounds like a thought, like let's think that instead, because it's a little confusing if you're around people and you're just like talking, they think you're talking to them. So I just learned, just just from this conversation I had with him, that he doesn't have an inner voice where he thinks in words. He thinks in pictures, which I know that that is very common with autistic people. But I never knew that they couldn't think in words either. And I've heard of people. I have another student who can't visualize at all. There's like 2% of the population that has that condition. I forget what that's called. I apologize, but he doesn't have an inner voice. So now I realize that all the things he's saying out loud are his thoughts, um, which it completely shifted my mindset on that. And so now I'm like, I think it's okay now, but like sometimes thoughts are not meant for people to be known. So I do worry about that. And like maybe he could be whispering when he's thinking out loud. I don't know, but that's like a whole new development that just came up. Someone else wrote in the chat, I had a student with autism and he kept taking his instrument apart during class. Well, that was one of our challenging behaviors on an earlier slide. And then she writes, I found out later that he just needed to take it all the way apart so that he could understand how each piece of it worked. Once he did that, he went from one of my students who struggled the most to one of my strongest students. Oh, I love that story. That's so great. And it sounds like you as the teacher understood this student a little bit more. At first, just by looking at the behavior, what is this kid doing? That's not what we're supposed to be doing right now. He's not following the directions, but then you realize that he just needed to learn more about the instrument and how they all fit together, all the parts fit together. Thank you for sharing that. It took me a bit to figure out why, but his mom helped to clue me in to what was happening. See, there's the mom is one of the stakeholders, and you communicated with the mom. That's great. Okay. So then another part of ABA that I've internalized is this idea of ABC data. So A stands for antecedent, B stands for behavior, and C stands for consequence. And I have this little timeline or flowchart. Antecedent leads to behavior, leads to consequence. So antecedent just means what happened right before the behavior. There's also something called setting events. So like did something happen that day that may have led to the behavior. Like sometimes students don't take their ADHD medication. That would be a setting event. Always love when parents let us know that ahead of time. Um, that's been common because of the shortage in the medication right now. Behavior is what was the behavior. And then in ABA, the word consequence, all it means is what happened right after the behavior in time. And part of what happened right after the behavior is how you, the teacher, react, especially if attention is a function, which is what this little cycle on the bottom right hand corner is. So you can start with some sort of antecedent that might be the cause of the behavior, but then there's a consequence. Maybe the teacher reacts, the student loves that, which then reinforces the behavior, and then you get the cycle, and you don't even realize as the teacher that you're like inadvertently making the behavior more frequent. So it's just good to know that that's a possibility, so you can just be more aware of how you respond to your students. So for the student that is attention seeking, if you can, ignore ignore the behavior if it's not that disruptive and not hurting anyone. um, like just ignore it. And if other kids are responding and they're getting attention from them, that's one of the trickiest situations, that requires some class management, some class culture, and perhaps a behaviorist to come in and um, establish a plan that you would not be able to establish yourself, which we will get into later. Any questions about ABC? And we're going to talk more about how to take the data later, but these are the three big buckets that you take data on when a behavior occurs. And I hope people are thinking about, oh, when that kid did this, this thing happened right before, and this kid reacted, or this thing happened afterwards, and oh, it all makes sense now. Okay, so this is kind of a joke, but and it's hard. This joke isn't as funny on the webinar. It probably wasn't that funny in person, but an ABC data sheet might look like this table. So you want to, on the left, you want to mark the date and the time. If it's a behavior that lasts a long time, you put how long it lasted. Setting events are kind of like, well, the setting, or like how the day started, or the overall feeling of the day, if it's important. So here we are in the Berkeley Study Group. Antecedent is me. I'm explaining about data and behavior. And maybe the behavior that I'm noticing, and this is not true, it's just a joke, is that the participants are not participating. And what's the consequence? Well, I'm trying to be funny to increase the engagement. And maybe that will help with participation. Maybe it won't. I don't know. But I don't know the function as to why the participants are not participating. Maybe they're doing something else. Maybe they're tired. Maybe they don't feel like they don't have the energy to participate. Um, so I don't know. I don't have enough data to know the function. Anyway, I thought that was funny. But you should know that if you are going to take data on antecedent behavior consequence, the general rule of thumb, which you probably can't follow because you only see the students a few times a week, is 10 data points or 2 weeks of data. Because you want to get enough information to notice patterns, which we're going to practice later. But the music teachers at my school only see the students twice a week. In the middle school level, I think they might see them 3 times a week in the younger grades. So that's not a lot of opportunity to take data. So I just say, take whatever data you can, and then once these patterns start to emerge, then you're good. You can stop taking what's called baseline data. You're not doing any interventions really. You're just trying to see what the function of the behavior is. Okay. Any questions about this baseline ABC data? Has anyone ever taken data like this before or thought about it? I only saw, oh, I'm just looking in the chat. I only saw my students for 30 minutes one time a week. What other strategies would you recommend for situations like that? Strategies or what to do with data? Because we haven't talked about strategies yet. Oh, for documenting data? Well, I would ask how, if you can recall, like how often is the behavior occurring in one 30-minute session? If it's happening a lot, then that could be 10 data points. But I hope there's not 10 data points in one 30-minute session because that would be extreme. Yeah. I don't know. And that's the thing, like this whole thing is so specific to each individual student. I guess I would say like if you can do two classes worth, that's like one 30-minute class one week and then the next week, you might be able to see patterns emerge. She says, I was also at multiple schools, which makes tracking data really tricky. I know, it's like taking data is really hard. And part of this too is like, if you can internalize what you're supposed to do, and like even just on a post-it, like, oh, like Bobby did this thing, and the whole class like erupted in laughter, like on a post-it, something like that, just so you have it, and then see what happens the next week. If it happens again, then maybe you, I mean, if you've been teaching for many years, you might be able to use your intuition and say, like, well, I'll look at my functions of behavior chart. This is for attention. Um, but yeah, I fully recognize that you're not seeing the students nearly as often. Um, so it can be tricky. I also believe on this slide I have in the speaker notes, let me get to that. I believe it's this slide. Um, Come on, computer. Yes. Is anyone like Google Forms? Our school really loves Google Forms. We use it for everything. Um, okay, yay. Okay, so I made this Google form and you're welcome to make your own, or you can just make a copy of it, or actually, I don't know if you can copy Google Forms, but if you love Google Forms, then this will be easy to make. So it you can put setting events if you think they exist. Um, you can select the class. We call music conservatory at our school. Um, and then you just type what really quick what the antecedent was, what was the behavior, consequence, and then you can kind of hypothesize what you think the possible function is. If there was a duration, like how many minutes, if you feel like recording the time, you should record the date. Um, and then when you hit submit, it'll populate in a Google Sheet for you. And you can even once you have a bunch of data within the Google form, there's like pie charts and tables that it will make for you automatically once you have a few data points. But this is nice if you have like if you have it on your computer, just like ready to go, or iPad, iPhone, just type the thing real quick. Um, Someone wrote, I find sometimes it's just being aware to look for antecedents. I pick up on things without writing it down. Same thing. Like I've just been, I mean, and I don't, I'm sorry for like newer teachers, but if you've been in the field for so long, it becomes this habit of just like, oh, well, this we're doing the thing that this kid doesn't want to do. They're trying to escape from demand. Like you just know the antecedent is this activity that they just find boring, or they're not they don't feel strong in, or something. It's like hard for them. So you might have that awareness already. Then that's important. Um, okay. So Google Forms is an option. There's probably apps and things, but if you're more of a paper-based person, which I sometimes am these days because I'm so sick of the computer, I just make a table and print it out, and I carry a clipboard with me everywhere I go. And it has like my schedule and all the other information I need. Someone else wrote, at the end of the quarter, I would try to share what data I collected with my special education colleagues and the student's homeroom teacher. I was just curious if you had other suggestions, but the Google form is helpful. Oh, great. I'm so glad that you're sharing information and collaborating with everybody. I love that. Um, Other suggestions for taking data? Um, I mean, I also love sticky notes. I have sticky notes everywhere. So just, it doesn't have to be this formal data sheet. If you just need to just take quick notes, that's fine. But if you are sharing data with other colleagues because you're trying to make some change and intervention or something, you might need to like formally type it up so they can read it. But as long as you have like ABC, antecedent behavior consequence, and the date, I think that's like the minimum that you need. I hope that was helpful. Okay, I'm going to advance us along. Okay, so again, I fully recognize that 2 weeks of data collection is unrealistic. I think whatever data you can take, and anytime you figure out that there's a pattern, even if there's not a pattern in the data, but you're recalling historical situations where you remember what the antecedent or consequence was, that's fine. This is not this perfect science. But once you have that data, whatever the data looks like, then you can be like, well, I think the function is attention. Once you've got the function, then you can select from some plans and interventions or tools. And so those things, these strategies, are the consequence. And just a little side note, and I'm sure you all know this already, that fair is not equal, right? So one student might need some sort of plan, another student might need this accommodation. Your expectations might be different for different students, and that's just okay. you know, um, we have such diversity in our classrooms, and kids need different things, and that's great. So this is a quote from Alice Hamill and Ryan Hurrigan. The music educator who finds ways to positively reinforce good behavior, compliance, and academic success will be far more successful than a music educator who believes all students should follow the same set number of rules to the same degree every day of the school year. Remember, fair is not equal. And you've probably seen these before. Um, and I feel like Dr. Bernard or someone else in this study group shows these images, but they relate to behavior for sure because like some kids just need a little extra support to be able to access the content, and that's equity. And you've probably seen this before as well. So we want to make sure that everyone has the ability to make it to the finish line. Okay, so ABA breaks consequences into 4 sections. And again, consequences just means what happens right after the behavior. So in education, in the school system, they'll talk about consequences, and consequence usually means like punishment, like something bad, like the kid gets punished for whatever the behavior is. But in ABA, consequence just means on the timeline what happens right after the behavior. So here we have this table. The 2 columns are labeled reinforcement and punishment, and the 2 rows are labeled positive and negative. Now, before we talk more about this, there are certain consequences that could be interpreted, they could go in multiple buckets depending on how you interpret it. Some consequences are just more cut and dry, like, oh, clearly that's negative punishment. And some aren't, like maybe it's actually negative reinforcement or something, or it's positive punishment or like it could go either way. So again, not a science. But just good to know that these terms exist so that when you develop a consequence, you can be a little more mindful about like what the consequence is. So, excuse me, I'm gonna have some water. Okay. So the word reinforcement just means whatever that behavior is, we want to increase or maintain it. So hopefully it's a desirable behavior that you want your students to have in class. And if the consequence is positive, you're adding something that the student likes to the situation so that whatever the behavior is can increase or maintain. So this consequence wouldn't follow a challenging behavior. This consequence would follow the behavior that you want. Um, a negative reinforcement is when you have the desired behavior that you're trying to increase or maintain, but you remove something that the kid doesn't like. So like in the, sorry, in the example of the band warming up and the sound being like way too abrasive for the sensory system of that student, maybe you like remove that stimulus by giving them like like headphones that block out the sound, and then that increases the or maintains the behavior of having a quiet voice. But it also helps the student because we don't want students to be stressed out by loud noises. Um, okay. And then punishment in the world of ABA means decreasing a behavior. So, like, you're trying to decrease or get rid of the challenging behavior. So, a positive punishment means you're adding something aversive to decrease the behavior. So, you're like doing something that makes the situation unpleasant. And I don't know that I've ever done positive punishment in the education setting, but I don't know how old the participants are here, but did you ever watch The Dog Whisperer? Cesar Millan. He was like this dog trainer. He like the show was on the Discovery Channel, and he'd like go to people's houses whose dogs were like uncontrollable, and he used positive punishment, which is just like yanking on the leash whenever a dog would lunge at someone walking down the street or like bark at them. Like he'd like yank on the leash and make this like high pitched sound that they didn't like. So he like that's positive punishment. Um, I don't know if that actually works. It's a reality TV show. I don't know how real it is. Um, and then negative punishment is again trying to decrease this challenging behavior, and the consequence that follows it removes something that the kid likes. So like missing lunch or missing recess for something, right? Like that would be negative punishment. Um, I always have this general rule of thumb that like whatever the consequence is should be related to the behavior. Like it shouldn't be this random thing. So like if some sort of challenging behavior happens at recess and the administration wants to like have the kid miss recess, well that makes sense because it's the consequence is connected. Maybe that kid was being unsafe at recess or like bullying another kid. Well, okay, so you miss recess. That makes sense to me. But if a kid is like screaming in their band class, to me it doesn't make sense for them to miss recess because recess and band don't connect. Does that make sense? Okay. So here's like examples of these types of consequences in the real world. Like positive punishment, well, maybe you studied for a test. Wait, did I say punishment? Sorry, positive reinforcement. Huh. Okay, positive reinforcement, just to remind, it means you're adding something good. The consequence is good, and you're trying to increase or maintain the behavior. So the behavior is you study for a test, consequence, you got an A plus. So you'll probably do that again. You'll probably do that behavior again and study, hopefully. Um, Negative reinforcement, you take away something that's aversive so that the behavior maintains or increases. So behavior was you took out the trash when it was smelly. Consequences, the smell went away. That's the negative part. You're taking that aversive thing away. impact, you will take out the trash again. And maybe you'll take it out before it gets smelly. Okay, so positive punishment, which I don't know how much this works with people. Like I don't know like the psychological impact, but I don't know if humans learn quickly from this kind of thing. But consequence adds something aversive, and you're trying to decrease whatever the behavior is. So this behavior is the person took this huge risk. Maybe they weren't ready to attempt the half pipe on their skateboard. They got a head injury. Impact, they're not going to do it again. I don't know. I don't know the situation. I feel like if they're a person who takes this kind of risk in the first place, maybe they'll do it again. I don't know. I don't want to make the assumption. Um, and then negative punishment in the real world. Um, Again, you're removing something, but you're removing something the person wants, and you're trying to decrease the challenging behavior. So this behavior is the person's driving recklessly. Well, they got pulled over by a cop and they lost their license. So will they be less likely to drive recklessly in the future? I don't know. Like, do people learn from that? Maybe. Um, Depends on the person. That's negative punishment. Questions about those four consequences. And again, I recognize that there's like overlap in how you interpret some of them, and that's okay. Just want to give people a second if they want to share anything or ask any questions. Go back to that slide. Okay. So, as a teacher in a school building, the recommendation is to always try positive reinforcement first. Because if that works, then great, you're living in this positive place and you don't have to have this like negative interaction with your student. Um, Sometimes this is enough. Sometimes all a student needs is to feel good about themselves, and like maybe whatever it is that reinforces that behavior you're looking for is really easy to do. Um, doesn't always work though, but you should always try positive reinforcement first. So find the moment when the student is doing what they're supposed to do, and however you're reinforcing, whatever like you're adding, whatever stimulus you're adding, which can be like attention, like hey great job, or whatever it is, or maybe there's like something they really like. I mean, it depends on what age level we're talking about, or what the student's interested in. um, Make sure that positive reinforcement follows the behavior that you're trying to maintain or increase in time, like you're trying to follow it one after the other. Okay, so now we're going to go into specific specific consequences and strategies. Um, this is called a FAIR plan. FAIR stands for, it's an acronym. So F stands for functional hypothesis and antecedent analysis. A is accommodations, I is interaction strategies, and R is response strategies, which is the same thing as a consequence. Um, A, which stands for accommodations, that's not a consequence. That's just like what supports are you giving the student to help them be successful. So that is kind of a proactive strategy. And interaction strategies can be both proactive and reactive. Um, how do you interact in general with the students, and also like how do you respond after the behavior? Um, so this, I'm not going to open it right now. I will open it. But this FAIR plan comes from this the behavior code, which is like the behavior code companion, I believe, or is it the actual book? The actual book. Um, and so the way it's set up in the book is it's not interactive. So I kind of like a few years ago typed the whole thing up in a Google Sheet so you can like check things off. And it's just this list of, it's so comprehensive. It has so many strategies. So even just using it as a tool to look at and be like, oh, didn't think of that. That might be something I want to try. Um, that's a good way to use this plan. But it's very long, and I'm looking at the time. I think perhaps we should take a 5 minute break now, and then when we come back, we can look at a FAIR plan and a few other strategies, and then we can sort of practice with this pretend student that I have. We can practice looking at data, analyzing it, determining the function, and then coming up with a plan, and then talking about emotions, and then that's it. Um, so, how about that? Is that all right? Take a 5 minute break? All right. So I will set a 5 minute timer. We'll come back at 2:15, and I'm going to pause the recording while that happens. Okay, so here's my cat. Just so everyone can see how adorable he is. um, so we left off talking about FAIR plans. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to put the link to this Google Sheet in the chat as well, so that the people on the webinar can access it. But um, I will also share that. Um, sorry, multitasking, having trouble communicating. Um, I will also share that on my screen. Okay, I need to exit full screen first. Nope. Too many options to click here. Exit slideshow, that's what I want. Okay, so I'm gonna put this in the chat. Sorry it's taking so long. And you should be able to, should be shared with anyone who has the link. And I'm gonna open it on here too, so that you can see it on Zoom. Okie dokie. So there's a lot of information on here, and I'll just go through the big ideas. So on the right hand side, this explains the goal of the FAIR plan. So we're working with well, they're calling it inappropriate. I would call it maybe challenging behavior. Um, and you're number one, you're looking at antecedents. What happened right before the behavior? You want to focus on how can we reinforce and continue or increase desired behavior. Um, Perhaps you could teach a replacement behavior that has the same function as the challenging behavior. We also want to look at maybe there's some underdeveloped skills that the student is struggling with. They just need direct instruction around. And that could help too. And then number 5 is respond to students' inappropriate behavior in a way that deters it. So do you remember the slide with A, B, C, and antecedent behavior and consequence kind of created the cycle and fed into the reinforcement of the behavior? We want to pick something that's going to deter the behavior. So, and again, just to remind, this is not for emotionally based or like dysregulation based behaviors. So first you want to kind of pick whatever category the behavior is in. These aren't very specific. I would click other and like type something there. And you probably don't have time to do all of this, but the way that I was trained was like, how do we operationally define the behavior? Like very specific, very concrete. Um, like what does it look like? You don't want to put any feeling into it. Just what are you noticing? What are you seeing? Like the student doesn't want to do the work is very subjective. Like maybe that's not the problem. Like what is it that you're observing? You know, when I tell the class to do whatever task, this student puts their head down and it ignores the teacher or something like that. It's objective. You can see it. here we have warning signs. So, if you know your students well, maybe it's like mid-year or you've had them before, you like some students will like give you some hints that they're about to do a challenging behavior. Like I used to have a student, and this is so sad, but he would get like really red in the face. And to me, that was a sign like, oh, like we gotta let's reassess. Like let's check in. What's going on? Let's slow things down. Let's take a breath. What's up? And that was really helpful for me to know that about him, that he had this warning sign. And maybe, and this is what's great about the FAIR plan, you don't have to do much thinking. You just check things off. Maybe there's an underdeveloped skill. Maybe they struggle with handling disappointment. Maybe they struggle with interacting with other people. Um, Maybe transitions are hard, right? Um, so many students with some of these struggles. Okay, so that's just like the intro to the FAIR plan. So then we get to the F, which stands for functional hypothesis. So here are some possible antecedents. So after you've taken your ABC data that you can take, even if it's in your head or on sticky notes, you can select what you think the antecedents, more than one, were before the behaviors. So people at home, is this big enough? Can you see this on the Zoom screen, or I feel like I might need to enlarge it a bit. I'm gonna make this a little bigger. Okay. And I can also make this look better. Okay, there we go. Okay. Thank you, people at home. Okay, so here are some possible antecedents. Like maybe it was independent work time, and that like the student had trouble getting started with something, and they like started talking to a friend. Ugh, such a middle school behavior. Um, Maybe you gave them feedback and they didn't like that. Given assistance or correction. Okay, so that was antecedents, and then we look at consequences. So you can take a look at this list. So, what happened right after the behavior. So you check those off. And then you'd be like, well, out of the 5 functions, I'm seeing this pattern in the behavior or in the antecedents and consequences. I think this pattern, if I synthesize this information, I think this pattern suggests the function is attention seeking from who. Maybe it's just their classmates. Is it positive or negative or both? So once you've got all that, then we get to the strategies. So accommodations, there's so much here. There's environmental accommodations, executive functioning, curriculum accommodations. So I'm not going to read all of it. I'm just going to scroll through. Writing. I mean, so many of my students struggle with writing. I don't know how much writing you have to do in a music class, maybe on sheet music in the later grades. And then there's teaching underdeveloped skills. So positive thinking, self-monitoring. Oh my gosh, I do so much of that with my middle schoolers. Sometimes kids just need some systems or some strategies, and you just teach them, and they're like, oh, thank you. Like, I needed this. I've been struggling with this other thing, and now I have the strategy. I can do that instead. More specific to self-regulation and self-monitoring, this list here. And then replacement behaviors. So if you determine that there's an attention function, ask them to teach them how to ask for a break appropriately, or teach them how to ask for help appropriately. There's some self-calming instruction and practice, and like specific accommodations around taking breaks. So before we go on to the I part, the interaction part of the FAIR plan, I'm wondering, are there any of these accommodations that you have questions about, or that you like, or you want to try, or just any comments about any of the accommodations? So someone said, not a question about the accommodations, but this seems like a lot to do each time. How often would you use something like this? Um, Elizabeth, can I ask a clarifying question? Are you, I don't think you're asking this, but I just want to be sure. Are you asking about like doing all of this on the list or just like going through the list, period, is a lot? Okay, going through the list, period. Um, I think if you have a student that you're like, I have no idea what to do, um, printing this out, or just, I don't know, if you're a paper person, computer person, or both, um, just go, you can go through it like quickly. I don't know. I'm not really answering your question. It just has a lot, it's comprehensive. It has so much. So I guess if you know that the accommodation is related to, or their struggle is related to executive functioning, which so many students struggle with, then you can just look in that list and maybe there's two things you want to try. It is totally overwhelming though. Yeah, it's like there's a lot here. Um, Perhaps maybe the FAIR plan isn't for you either. Like that's okay. Um, this is like more for people that like really just don't have any idea what to do. But if you have ideas already, like accommodations already, like you can use those. The list is really comprehensive, but not necessarily for each instance of a behavior. No, 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 no. This is for a kid who you've like taken data. I'm putting data in quotation marks. Data on, and like they're having challenging behavior, and you need something because you can't like keep having that behavior go on continually in your class. And I mean, some of the stuff is good teaching too. Like maybe you're already narrating the passage of time. Like I do that. Like, all right, we have 10 minutes left. You have to get this thing done. All right, 5 minutes left. You know, um, or maybe you're not, and you're like, oh wait, that might help my student who gets like anxious about class ending. Okay. And then I think did someone else say something? Oh, someone else said, I like that there is this list. I see some of them as more practice than others because of time constraints. Totally. Yeah. You take whatever you need from this, and if it doesn't work for you, like you don't have to do it. I'm like giving you a ton of options today. Um, oh, practical. More okay, so some of them as more practical than others. I got it. Okay, thank you. All right. I'm going to move on to the I section of the FAIR list, but if anything about accommodations comes up, please write it in the chat. So I stands for interaction strategies, which is how you and the student interact. um, and that could be, like I said, like before the behavior, just like how you interact in general, or how you interact after the behavior. Okay, so there's some general interaction strategies you might want to try. Maybe you only want to focus on strengths when you talk to the student. I have a student who was saying, so she has ADHD, and she was saying that she needs to work on being a better listener. So she's identified that her challenging behavior is very social, and that she like will say she'll talk to other kids, but then she just talks and talks and talks and talks, which is like common with ADHD. And that she realizes that's annoying, and that's why people don't want to be friends with her. It's like the saddest thing to hear. Um, so she has some self awareness, like she recognizes that she talks a lot. And so to me, I was like, well, I get why you see that. I get why you say that, but it shows that you're really passionate. You're just really passionate about these topics, which there's nothing wrong with. What you need to work on is like then allowing someone else to respond and listening to them and not walking away or not ignoring them, you know? And part of why she does that is like, um, it's too complicated to get into, but it's a bit of an escape or avoidance, um, like tuning people out. Um, But I'm doing like direct instruction around that behavior. And she's identified that that's a struggle for her and she wants help with it, which is wonderful. But I don't like the how she's viewing it as a negative thing. I want her to see that she has strengths. She's an amazing storyteller. I'm like so skilled at storytelling. I'm like jealous of her skill. Um, so to me, that's a strength. But now what? Like now. So let's keep that. And what's next? How can you be better in your interactions with peers after that? Okay, so let us continue. So those are just general interaction strategies. Strategies when the student is transitioning in your interacting with them during those transitions. How do you tell them about transitions? Um, ooh, I love this one. Strategies for giving demands. So, oh my goodness, I have an eighth grader who just can't take any demands. There's like, it's like just struggles with authority, like any authority, and it stinks because I have learned, I have kind of justified this over the last 2 years, but like it's better that I use humor as much as possible with her, and I give her a million choices, you know, and ultimately she kind of makes the decisions. I don't, because if I do, if I'm like, you're working on math right now, oh my God, it turns into this huge battle. And it's like weeks of her just like being so rude. I don't take it personally at all. Like, I know that she's trying to communicate something, but she cannot handle um, authority. And that's like the escape from demand, right? That's it, 100%. Um, it's very complicated as to why that is, but that's the function. Um, Sometimes I do this. I'd love for you to work on your math, and then I walk away so I don't have to hear like whatever rude thing she's like whispering at me. Um, but I'd rather have a good relationship with her than have this power struggle every day. And I'm always like, I'm here if you need anything. Like, if you ever change your mind about working on the math, like, I'm here. And she's more open now. It's not where I want her to be. It's just I have to be patient. It's gonna take longer for her to be able to accept help and like be told what to do. Um, Anywho, negative attention seeking from a teacher. These are some interaction strategies here. And then finally, oh, any questions about the interaction strategies or comments? Or maybe you've used one of these before and it didn't work, or did you notice a change? Okay, if they come up, I will address them in the chat. So we'll move on to the final part of the acronym R, which stands for response strategies, or just another word for consequences, what happens right after the behavior. So maybe some of these will work with the function of your behavior. Oh, I love this one actually. If a student exhibits a low tolerance for work, start in building small increments. Give escape from work, so give them breaks, like allow that if they're asking for it, and build up workload slowly. So I don't know if this is a pandemic. I mean, so many so many of the classes are so different now because of the pandemic, but it just feels this way. I don't know if there's any data to support this, but like many students just don't have the endurance that they had like 3 years ago. And there's always kids who struggle with endurance. but it just feels like it's harder to maintain that focus. Um, so I've done this before, and especially with ADHD, like for kids who feel really overwhelmed with a lot of things that they need to get done, do a little part. That's it. That's all you need to do, you know. And sometimes, like more often than not, I would say like, "Oh, I'll do it." The kid will be like, "Well, I can do a little more," and then they get this momentum, and they're able to build up that tolerance and that stamina. We're going to talk about a reflection sheet later. So scrolling down, if the behavior is escape from the demand or avoidance motivated, you can avoid responses that would reinforce escape motivated behavior. So timeouts or getting removed from class. So if you know after you take all that data, the student is trying to escape from the task or like doesn't want to do the task, do not give them a consequence that allows them to escape. Um, sorry, I should say don't give them a punishment that allows them to escape. That is different from teaching them how to take a break with their words. So sometimes we do want to teach the skill of like, this is too much. Can I take a break? Yes, you can. Like you want to reinforce using communication, um, but you don't want to do like, you're misbehaving in class. You're gonna leave now and go to the principal's office. Like time out or whatever, because then the kid's like, yes, that's what I wanted. I misbehaved and I got what I wanted. I will misbehave again so I can get what I want. I see something in the chat. So I noticed that a lot, I think it is a pandemic theme. They got used to, I'm sorry, to the freedom to walk away. I'm not sure if I'm reading that correctly. I'm so bad at like, anytime someone sends me a text and there's like a slight typo, I'm like, I can't figure out what it's supposed to say. They got my type. It's okay. My typing is bad too. um, they got used to the freedom to like they could be on their computers at home, and if they didn't feel like doing it, they could just like get up and walk away from the Zoom class or whatever. So they were taking those breaks, um, which I get though, because like Zoom for a long time, oh, I can't even go there. Like I remember my brain was so fried from teaching that way. Um, but like when he says like that, it's like a habit, it's a pattern now. Like, oh well, that's how school was the last couple of years. So I don't have that stamina. They don't develop that stamina. Um, then there's like a response for attention motivated behaviors, which are so hard. If the attention seeking is just with you as the teacher, I feel like that is very easy to manage because you just ignore it. Even if it's like horrible behavior, you just try to ignore it because it's just you and the kid. No other kids are seeing that. No other kids are reacting. You can just kind of ignore it, um, unless like someone's being like really rude or like hurting you. That's a whole other story. But if it's just something kind of ridiculous attention-seeking behavior, just ignore it. And oh my God, I'm so guilty of this one-on-one talks or like having a heart to heart about the behavior. Like, oh, I've done that with a student who is attention seeking, and I learned that that is not the way. And then if there's a tangibly motivated behavior, avoid responses such as giving an object or allowing the student to do something after the child demands it inappropriately. Ugh, I've seen that kind of thing before. Like, I want the iPad. I want the iPad. Ah! And the person gives them the iPad because they just want the kid to stop yelling. That will reinforce the behavior. Excuse me. Um, any questions about this section, the response strategies? While you're thinking of questions or comments, the next few slides have other response strategies too. This isn't as comprehensive. So if questions come up, I will address them. All right. So next, has anyone ever had experience with a behavior plan? Something that looks like this. So on the right are pictures of what's called the token economy, which you might use with younger students. Um, Looking in the chat. Yep. So some people have some experience with that. So this on the right, the student does, whatever the behavior is that you're trying to increase or maintain. Every time the student does it, they get like some sort of symbol, like some token. In this example, there's like an Angry Birds or whatever. Um, so they did the thing 5 times, whatever it was. It can be, I don't know, maybe they played their part all the times that you asked the class to. Um, and then like they get some sort of reinforcement afterwards. And I do not use food as reinforcement. There's a picture of gummy bears here. I'm like not into that. That feels a little bit like animalistic to me. Um, but like whatever, I don't know. Like at the middle school level, the biggest thing is like a homework pass, which is actually that would be negative reinforcement because you're removing an aversive stimulus. um, but it is reinforcement. Um, or maybe they can leave class early so they can play, I don't know, some sort of game on the computer, which I don't really do that as much these days in middle school as I used to. But maybe younger students would want that. So you'd have to know what your student likes, like what's going to reinforce their behaviors to know what they're working for. um, I believe I have in the speaker notes of this slide some other examples of behavior plans. So let me see. I think they're linked. Oh, my computer's so slow. There we go. Oh god, these are funny. Okay, so I'm gonna click on the positive reinforcement one first. So this was for a 7th grader. So this is a student who in the 6th grade was getting like breaks all the time. I'm sorry, I'm exaggerating, but like after every period he'd get a break. And like maybe he needed that, fine. But it's just really hard to do in the 7th grade. So I was trying to like wean him off these breaks, so that he just needs one at the end of the day because we have lunch and recess in the middle of the day, and then maybe I don't know. Like I was trying to get it so he's trying to create a schedule for him so that whatever these breaks were just happening less frequently to increase that endurance, like we were talking about earlier. So this was a sheet of paper that I shared with him, and it was like a weekly plan. You can see it goes Monday through Friday. And at the top are 4 expected behaviors that we're trying to reinforce. So the first one is stay in your seat or ask the teacher to get out of your seat. The reason why that one was there was because when the school year started in 7th grade, this kid was just like pacing back and forth, like even just walking in front of the teacher, just like not able to read the room. Um, and I wasn't sure what that was about. Like I didn't know if that was sensory, I didn't know if it was attention seeking. I don't know if it was just an underdeveloped skill that he didn't know how to sit in his seat. Um, he can sit in his seat now. Like he's totally amazing at that. um, 2 is stay on task. So this includes using your Chromebook appropriately. I don't know if students use Chromebooks in your music classes, but oh my god, it's like such a problem across the middle school level of students just like going onto sites and not doing what they're supposed to do. I mean, we don't live in this perfect bubble, so I know that it's impossible to completely, we can't micromanage it, but this kid was doing stuff he wasn't supposed to do often. Um, Follow teacher directions, of course, and be kind and show respect to teachers, students, and objects. Um, so then the directions for the plan are right here. And actually, I'm sorry, I should make this bigger for the recording. Should have done that sooner. When you follow the expectations above, you can earn a reward in the Learning Center. You need to receive a check mark from a teacher for each class. You are allowed one reminder in each class. If you show your teachers amazing student skills, you can earn back a check. So obviously, you wouldn't have a plan like this in your music class because you don't see the student this often. um, but if the student had a weekly plan like this, the music class would be listed here. The reason why the band isn't listed on this schedule is because that was the student's strongest class. Like trumpet, he's like amazing at trumpet, and like all these behaviors, um, challenging behaviors, don't happen in band, which is like awesome. But they were happening in all these other places. um, so, but like, and you could maybe think of a student perhaps that like, all right, well, maybe I could have one chart with like these are the tasks for the class, even if it's a 30-minute class. Like what is the agenda of your class? Like, do you have like a warm up? Do you have like stations? I'm not a music teacher, so I do apologize that I don't know like examples of how the music class might be set up for the day, but you could have like the agenda on this plan, and if they're doing what they're supposed to do during the warm up, yay, they get a check. And if they're not, then they just don't get a check. And then if they get a certain number of checks, then whatever the reward is, then they get that. Any questions about this, or can you think like of any students that might benefit from this, or a way that you would adapt it for your classroom? If you have a para in your class, like this would be a really good thing for them to do, to be the ones like checking off and monitoring the behaviors. And generally, like for each of these like section, like so science or something, we don't like whenever that this activity is over, whatever it is, when it's over, that's when we check in with the student. Oh, how did you do with that? How do you think you did with these behaviors? Do you think you did them all with one reminder? um, and that encourages some self-reflection too. And the one reminder is important too, because this shows like no one is perfect. We all make mistakes and like forget, if we're in a habit of doing something. So that's okay. Like you can get one reminder to follow teacher directions. This is what your one reminder to follow teacher directions. And then after that, it's like, okay, now it's on you. You need to do the expected behaviors. All right, so that's positive reinforcement. And then so this plan I'm about to show you has worked wonders. And this is actually negative punishment, which you might recall. I'll go back to that slide. You remove a pleasant stimulus to decrease the behavior. Now, I know all of us are hailing from like different parts of the world, but where I teach in Massachusetts, like teachers can't just give negative punishment. Like we can't, like we're not allowed to just be like, you have detention, like that's not. It's like an administrator that needs to decide that, and it's very rare that children get detention. Like I grew up with that. Doesn't exist anymore. It barely exists, I should say. So anytime there's like negative punishment, an administrator is the one that has to decide what it is, and then we have to tell parents that it's happening. Um, and sometimes that's what it takes. Sometimes a student like positive reinforcement isn't enough, depending on their profile, and they need this like negative punishment to what I say is like it's kind of old school, like feel the sting, so they know how their behavior is like impacting themselves and others. Um, so this plan is great, actually. So our behaviorists developed this, our BCBA, and we call it the reset plan. And this, I think we showed the student this one time, but it's um, this is more for the teachers to look at because the teachers or the para or me is like doing the plan. I'll just summarize it really quick and then I can read through the important parts. But so we identified the challenging behaviors on this one. These are the things we're trying to decrease. We don't want these things to happen. And then, if the challenging behavior happens, then he needed to leave the room for 5 minutes and sit in a chair in the hallway, which sounds like extreme. Um, but this is a student who loves learning, but also is just so attention seeking from the entire classroom. And, middle schoolers get riled up pretty easily. So it was easy for him to get attention from the whole class. And we explained to him, like, well, we're not going to remove the whole class. Like you're going to have to take a 5 minute break from the whole class by yourself in the hallway and reflect on what happened so that you don't do it again. Because the things that he was doing are here: rude or disrespectful comments or actions towards adults, rude or disrespectful comments or actions towards peers, inappropriate name calling, and it could just be like calling you some random name that he feels like calling you without any consent, just like calling you that name, or touching or taking other people's belongings. And all of this was to get people to just get them riled up. So it's when there's attention seeking and there's a bunch of people in the room, it's really hard to have a plan because you can't completely control your entire class and say like, oh, when the student does this, don't react. And we let the parents know, and they said, "What? Yeah, we trust the school. Like whatever you think will help." Then part of this negative punishment was like he loves learning, so when he was out in the hallway and resetting for 5 minutes, he missed instruction, and he'd come back very frustrated, like, "Wait, what did I miss?" Well, that's the consequence. You missed it. Like you made this choice. You made a choice to do inappropriate name calling. And sure enough, like we learned too, like having that interaction when he returned from the reset was giving him attention. So we stopped having the conversations, and I printed out these little checklists and I checked off what the behavior was, and I just gave it to him like a ticket and no conversation about what happened. So that's how he's like, he knows what happened. I give him the checklist, check off the thing, and then he just goes back to class. There were a couple other behaviors where he's given a reminder warning, like he's given a chance. So like we called it not being in the right place at the right time. So if he's just like wandering around the classroom or hiding under a desk or table, again, this is all attention seeking. He can get a reminder for that. And then the protocol, which I explained, is right here. Just like he sits in this chair in the hallway for 5 minutes, and then we come back and get him. And then we found out like there was one class where it was happening more often than the others. So he was doing really well in all the other classes except for this one class. And we don't know what about that class was making him act out more. So then we changed it to be like, look, like this plan is working for you in every class except for this one. So we're going to make this class 6 minutes. And I'm going to tell you, like, he hasn't had a reset in months. I don't even remember when the last one was. So this has worked for him. But again, like we're not, as teachers, we're not really allowed to develop these kinds of plans. We need an administrator to help us with it, and we need parent approval. Any questions about this plan, this behavior plan, or any other plan like that? Or anything you want to share? Someone asked, did you have a hard time getting other teachers on board with the negative consequence plan? No, because they were fed up. They were so fed up with him, just like getting the like he would just like go up to a teacher's desk and take the tape dispenser. Like they're just like, what are you doing? Stop. I think so. They all the teachers got on board, but I think because it's as I said in the beginning of the presentation, we have to be consistent. I think it was hard to be consistent because we all had to like learn this new way of responding and interacting. But eventually, like after a couple of months, the teachers were like, okay, like, and then they saw that it was working. So it because the plan was working, it reinforced teachers being able to carry out the plan. So it kind of reinforced their behavior, which is kind of nice. Um, and all it was, I mean, he it was nice because he knew exactly what to do when the teacher was like, "That's a reset." He would just take a chair out and go sit. Like he knew um, that it helped him regulate. Um, and there were a few times where he was like, "Ah, I think I need a reset. Can I take one?" And we're like, "Yes, that's the whole point. Like, you just need a break from this environment to like get back on track and like focus on what you're supposed to be doing instead of getting attention." So I love that he was asking for the reset because I don't know, like it's the idea of having a reset isn't a bad thing. Like sometimes we need resets and that's fine. Um, but I love that he was giving them to himself, and now he just doesn't really need them anymore, which is great. He's matured. So this last one is it's called the Chromebook Credit Repair. So I have to explain the backstory before I open it up. So I had a student who had an emotional component to his behavior. Um, but this plan, which is like a behavior plan, did help him long term. So part of the component was how much he had this love-hate relationship with his Chromebook because of the pandemic. And so he could not stop himself from watching funny YouTube videos. And he would just come on up, come on. Sorry, my cat was asking to come onto my lap. um, he would just like get I don't know exactly what it was, but he'd like punch his Chromebook and like slam it and like put it in the garbage. Um, and so we had a plan for that for him to reflect on his treatment of the Chromebook per se, but that plan wasn't working because his behavior, like I said, it was emotionally based. A behavior plan is not going to work with an emotionally based behavior. What ended up happening towards the like third quarter of seventh grade was he just took his Chromebook and threw it on the ground so hard that the whole thing just like came apart. um, and so we decided, all right, no more Chromebook for the rest of the year, which we had to ask the administration about, and they supported that. But we also felt that he needed to like repair um, the damage he'd done. And he doesn't have money because he's a child. So we had him do like work to repair for the damage he did to the Chromebook. And so this is the plan for that. And I'm laughing because it ended up working so well and he turned out to be like such a good worker. And I didn't know this about him. So he, instead of, like I said, he didn't have the money to pay for the repair of the Chromebook. So we had him do work after school and help out with tasks. And so I set up the schedule for him and, on Mondays for these are the options you can do. And then on Wednesdays, here's a checklist. And I'm like setting up this checklist so he can be independent with all these tasks every Wednesday, every Monday, and on the next page on Thursdays, lost and found cleanup. Like, so these consequences may not seem connected to the Chromebook. Like, remember how I said a consequence needs to be connected to the behavior, like damaging the Chromebook? They are, because the person, our like technology specialist, she's the one that does like, well, helping teachers. So this whole section is all about like helping her in her classroom, like sorting cables and things. This section, the printer paper, like that's something our technology specialist would do. So we had him do it instead. And then this last one, is also a job that our technology specialist had. So he did the lost and found cleanup on Thursday. So he was really helping her out, and she's the one who distributes the Chromebooks. So we thought that that connection made sense. And so he did this for 3 months without a Chromebook. And I had to teach him, and she had to teach him for a few weeks. Um, but he ended up being so independent with it, and like he did everything beautifully. And then he came to eighth grade and no problems with his Chromebook at all. Like so good and so redirectable, and just like can shift from one thing to another, and like a totally different kid. So I do think this after school tasks, like this Chromebook credit repair plan that we did for the end of seventh grade, like really helped him in the eighth grade. Because he's doing great. Like there's been no issue with his Chromebook at all. Um, so really proud of him and glad we figured out something that worked. Like I said, trial. There's a lot of trial and error with these plans, and this one was really effective. Any question about that or comments or anything? So I believe we have one, two, so two more kind of consequence strategies. So the next one is reflection sheets. So this was listed on the FAIR plan in the response section. Anyone know what a reflection sheet is or used one with a student before? So while I'm waiting on that, it's basically like there's a behavior that happens in your classroom, and maybe it's something that continues to happen, and you need to take this to the next level, or maybe it was like one big thing, and you want the student to reflect on their behavior with you in the form of writing. And it's usually like when they fill out this reflection sheet, it's during a time that they don't want to be doing it. Um, Someone wrote, yes, we used to use them with Champ's behavior program. Oh, great. I'm glad someone you use them. Did you find them effective? I haven't had much luck with them, but other teachers have. So that's why I include them. And maybe it's better for younger kids, and that's why I don't know. Or I'm just doing them wrong. Ugh. But I tend to feel that when I've used these with students that they just like it like creates this relationship with me that's not like I'm kind of like this bad guy or something. They're like, ah, oh, Miss Lauricia, like I have to give him my lunch for this, and I'm like, yes, you do. You made a choice that wasn't so great, so we have to reflect. Um, and I just didn't find it made a change, but um, maybe it will with your students. I don't know. Um, so someone writes, I found them hard. I think that there is a certain level of kids that is very narrow where these work. Yeah, maybe that's what it is. It's just like not with my population of students. I wonder too if it's like the writing, like that's like extra. Like maybe they'd be better with just like having the reflection sheet as a guide for a conversation, or like I don't know. Like I have a few scaffolded versions of them, so there's less writing. Um, but I will show you some examples. So, and I've like adapted these so many different ways for each student too, and it's just I don't know. It's not the I just ugh. I don't feel strongly one way or the other. I just don't use them regularly the way I use the other things. So yeah, this first part, what was the inappropriate behavior? So the kid has to like hold himself accountable, and what did you do? What was your behavior? And most of the times, at least with my population of students, they're like nothing. um, Someone wrote, I also think they need to be a part of the homeroom class culture in order to work in specials. Oh, that's a really good point. Yeah, if like kids are filling out these reflection sheets with their gen ed teachers regularly, or it's like not that unexpected to be filling it out with the music teacher. Yeah, maybe that was my problem because the gen ed teachers weren't using them and I was the only one using them. Someone else writes, I see these being difficult for students who don't necessarily see an issue with their behavior. Yes, and that's kind of the problem. And the point of the reflection sheet is to fix that, right? It's supposed to help kids see that what they did is a problem, but it doesn't, like that defensiveness or whatever just comes out more. Um, but I'm still going to show you because maybe there's something from this that you like. Okay, so eventually they have to admit what they did. And if they can't, then you can tell them, and then you tell them to write it down. The consequences of my actions, meaning what effect did my behavior have on my learning and the learning of others. So I like this appropriate behavior, what I will do differently next time or what I should have done. And then like people sign it. And then here's another one. This is one that I've used before. So instead of behavior, they just call it a choice because it's acknowledging that they chose to do the thing, whatever it was. So what choice did I make? Why did I make the choice? So that's kind of getting at the function of the behavior and helping them be more self-aware. Next time I feel this way or I want to make this choice, what will I do? So whoever I made this for, I thought that this multiple choice was this was made for less writing, and also I felt that these were appropriate options, like replacement behaviors. Someone writes, I think the word choice is easier for some kids. Yeah, agree. And then this was a stupid question. I don't know why I added this, but you might like it for your students. What are some strategies that don't work when I feel this way? Um, and then if the behavior is connected to like another person and like damaging the relationship or hurting someone else's feelings, there needs to be a question about how will I repair the relationship. And so here are some options here. Um, that's really hard for some kids to do that, and they might not be there yet. Um, this is just like a reflection for a student. I don't know that it's like about behavior, but it's just like helping her reflect on her day. Um, so, because I think this was a long time ago, but I think her issue was that she's just like stuck in this negative headspace, and all she could focus on was like bad things. So we were trying to help her just like see like, well, the whole day isn't bad, even though this one thing happened. Like, let's try to balance that out a little bit because it was like eating her up inside. This is more emotional. Um, but her parents asked that I do this with her. And these are all her words. She typed into the document. Is that it? Yeah. Okay. And then I have reflection sheets that has some like scaffolds or accommodations to make it a little bit easier. While that's loading, someone typed, teaching empathy can be really challenging for certain populations of students. I can see this being a good tool for some students, but I think it depends entirely on the school climate and the students' strengths. Agree. I say like try anything once. And if it's like not for you, this has to work for you too, right? Um, I don't think that this works for me, but that doesn't mean it doesn't work for other people. So here's another sheet about choices. And here's getting at that empathy that someone wrote in the chat. Would I like to be treated the way I treated the person or people involved? Oh my God, so often students are like, I don't care. I don't care if someone did it to me. Like, all right, you're not ready for this question yet. That's okay. um, so I'm not going to read through all of this. Here's another one. This one's worded, what did you do that broke our agreements? So if you create like norms or agreements or a contract for the whole class at the beginning of the school year, that's what that's referencing. Like some teachers have these this like poster, and all the kids create these norms and expectations at the beginning of the year. They vote on them, and so if respect each other is one of the agreements or the expectations, then they can just look at the list and say like, I did not respect so and so. This is interesting. What need do you have that you were trying to meet when you did that? I feel like that's a little bit advanced, but maybe they don't know, and it's worth a conversation. Like part of this too is to help you talk to the student about this. So yeah, restorative justice. Someone wrote restorative justice in the chat. Um, yes, I'm not gonna get too into that. Here's some more. This one's what did you do? Very open-ended. Write the rule you failed to follow. That seems, I don't know if I like that wording. Do you think you need to repair any damage to a person or things caused by your actions? If yes, what act of apology will you make? Um, I don't like the wording of that either because they could just say no. Um, One other thing about these reflection sheets, so like if you have the time, you should be sitting with the student and helping them fill this out. But sometimes maybe they should just be on their own to fill it out. And maybe that was my problem, that I was always with them, but I should have just like let them process it alone, like kind of privately. And other teachers that have done something like so some teachers will have kids just write a letter, like very open-ended. And if it's just like not acknowledge, it's not holding themselves accountable or it's not repairing, they're like, oh, you didn't do what I asked you to do. Here's another blank piece of paper, try it again. And so that's a strategy. And it might be inauthentic what the student writes, but it's like still it's like getting them to think about it. And this just ex- explains the whole process of reflection. And this is an example of a reflection sheet that was filled out. And you should have access to all of this when you get the slides shared with you. And time check, we have about 45 minutes. I think we're making good time. And this last one is more for younger students or maybe students who struggle with reading. So it has visual supports. So they're calling it a think sheet. I can think about my choices and how they affect me and others. So, you know, you can see what the choices are to choose from and how it made us someone feel. You put the person's name in here and what they could do better next time. What are the replacement behaviors? And when I make a positive choice like that, here are some things. These are again like empathy things, um, which they might not get now, but at some point, hopefully, it will click. Any questions about or comments about reflection sheets? All right, so the last strategy which I've used, I would say with a 50-50 success rate. Those aren't hard numbers, but the reason I say 50-50 is because it doesn't work with emotional based behaviors. Um, Definitely works well with behaviors that have the element of choice. Um, so you write up a contract and you can include the student in the language of the contract of like what is expected of them. Then you have the student sign it. You have any adult that works with the student sign it. Sometimes you can have parents sign it. Um, and then because it's in writing and it's a contract, uh, then it feels like more formal and like, it's like in writing that the adults and the kid are going to follow through on whatever is on the contract. Um, so I have this link to some contracts. Oops. Anyone never used a behavior contract before? So some people say we have had some in our school, and I have for undergrad students, but not K to 12. Oh wow, I'm curious about that. Undergrad, like for behaviors or for like assignments or something. I don't teach undergrad, so I don't know a lot about that world. So I haven't used one in a really long time. But this one that I'm showing you, oh, I'm looking at the chat. Both it was a student teacher who wasn't responding well to feedback in the classroom. Oof. Um, so this one worked really well. I can give you the background. So this student just I'm like, I don't feel good thinking back on it, but he just checked out in math. He would just sit there and not do his work, and it's not because he couldn't do it. Like it wasn't that it was hard. It's because he would go home and complain to his parents, and his parents enabled him and basically taught him learned helplessness, um, and blamed the teachers for him not doing his work. This happens. Like sometimes the parents and the school aren't on the same page. Um, so this kid I don't know if he was aware that he was doing it, but he was kind of manipulating the adults and pitting them against each other so he could just sit back and not doing anything in math. If this was a student where math was hard, I would have a completely different perspective on this. He just didn't feel like doing it. Like that's all this was. He just wasn't he just didn't find math interesting. Most people don't. Most I love math, but most people do not enjoy it, right? But they do it. Um so yeah, I don't just didn't feel like doing it. So I did have to get the behaviorist on board because this is negative punishment in the contract. But we finally got the parents to agree to it after many years of come on, your kid needs to take, show some responsibility and take ownership over his actions here. This is not because of the school. So they agreed. And it says beginning today, whatever the date was, I will ask for help on math problems, which he didn't need help, but we put it there anyway, and try to do them on my own in order to develop my independent skills. If I do not ask for help or try math problems on my own, I will have to stay up for lunch and complete them. So there's that negative punishment. He'd be missing um, the thing. So we're taking away something that he enjoys to decrease this refusal of doing work. If I don't finish the work during lunch and recess, I will have to complete the work at home. I'm going to tell you, the kid was pissed that this was a contract. He tested it out once. He stayed up for lunch and recess. He did the math work he refused to do in class. He completed it. Every math class after that, he was completely on task. I was like, why did we wait 3 years to do this? Um, I know the answer to that question. Sorry, I'm saying it out loud because it's just when parents aren't on board with the school, it really makes you know giving the kid what they need a lot more difficult. And this kid needed this. He needed this negative punishment to kick him into gear, and it worked. And now he had great habits throughout the rest of the school year. So this contract worked like a charm. Scrolling down, this contract was more for a student who had some emotional anxiety stuff, but I included it just so you could see um, how it was set up. And she helped me write this. So she talked about, sometimes she's feeling like she doesn't understand something. Um, I'm sorry, I didn't explain the backstory. So when she feels overwhelmed in a class, she just would ask to go to the bathroom or ask to go to her locker. Like she was escaping from demand because it was just too much for her. Very overwhelmed, and she was missing a lot of class time. And missing a lot of class time makes you miss content, and then missing content and then having to come back to class is very overwhelming. So it was this like cycle of overwhelm for her. So we talked about different ways she might be feeling and the types of breaks that she could take, but helping her not miss time in class. Um, and she kept this as a reminder because she's so used to just leaving the classroom. So this helped her get back on track. And then this next one. Oh, this one was just about like helping a student be better about asking for a break. So escape from demand was the function, and we were trying to teach him the skill of asking for a break instead of I forget what his behavior was, to be honest. But whatever behavior he was doing was motivated by escaping from the task. And in this it says like if I ask for a break the right way, like by writing it down or verbally, he doesn't have to make up any of the missed work. There's no real consequence for it. And this worked well too. So those are just 3 examples of behavior contracts. Any questions about those? Or any ideas that you got from that? They work really well with students who have behaviors that fall into those functions, those 5 functions, or the top 3: the attention, escape from demand, and tangible. I'm thinking we should take one more 5-minute break, and then when we come back, we can practice looking at some data that's been taken about this pretend student stand, and then we can kind of wrap up, and then just talk a little bit more about the difference between emotions and behaviors. Um, okay, so it's 3:22, so let's come back at 3:28. And I'm going to stop recording and I'm going to shut off my camera and mic for that time. So now we are going to look at some data and try to determine the function of the behavior. So exciting. All right, so when I do this in person, usually we take turns reading, but I think that will be difficult. So I'm going to kind of read through the data as simply as I can. But this is what we're going to do. So we're going to look at the data. After that, I am going to ask you, do you notice any patterns in the antecedents, behaviors, or consequences? And then if we notice a pattern, then we can determine what the function or functions of Stan's behavior is or are, and if are there any underdeveloped skills we want to teach him. And then come up with some ways we can manage Stan's behavior. Any questions about that? And if you would prefer to just use your microphone because that's easier than the chat, I'm down for it. But I totally also the chat is perfectly wonderful. Okay. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. Okay, there we go. Can you all see that? Yes, great. Okay, so this only has 6 data points I want to say, which is fine. So Stan is in kindergarten. On October 6th, so setting events are kind of like background information about the day or like how the day started or like the actual setting. So the antecedent is that the teacher tells the student that recess will be indoors today, it's raining. And what is his behavior? He screams and runs for the teacher and hits her in the stomach repeatedly. Ooh. The consequence: teacher physically escorts Stan into the small hallway for 4 minutes until he is calm. Then, same day, like a little bit later, so this setting event would actually be connected to these first three, oops, these first three data points because they're all happening on the same day. Um, so I'll read that. Mom's boyfriend moved out of the house last night. That sounds like kind of a big deal. That might affect our student. So the antecedent is the teacher gives the transition warning that choice time is over. The behavior, Stan screams and grabs the arm of the teacher assistant to his right and motions that he is going to bite her. Consequence: the teaching assistant gets up and moves to the other side of the classroom. And then towards the end of the school day, the antecedent, students are putting on their coats, and Stan is playing with a Lego in the dramatic play area. Miss Kelly says, "Stan, come on, it's time for the bus," and shows him the icon from his schedule. Behavior? He screams no and ignores the demand. Miss Kelly repeats statement and he grabs the schedule, throws it, and then pinches his cheek and kicks the teacher. Consequence: he is escorted into the hallway for 5 minutes and then has to be escorted to the bus by two adults. Okay. And then we have three more data points. Ah. One second. Okay. So the next day, the setting event is that he reports that he forgot to take his medication. So the antecedent is Miss Kelly shows the class the visual schedule of literacy activities they need to accomplish. She asks them to sit at their desks to begin literacy. Stan looks at the list of activities he needs to do. And then his behavior: he yells and scratches the top of his hand, then runs for Miss Kelly, who is holding the schedule. She blocks his first two attempts, but then he succeeds in hitting her. What is the consequence? Both teachers bring Stan to the hallway where he stays for 28 minutes. Long time. And then at the end of the day, and this looks like it's a long time. It starts at 1:42 and it goes till the end of the school day. The antecedent: Stan asks to look at the book a peer is reading. The peer tells him to wait until she's done. Behavior: Stan falls on the floor and screams. He starts pulling at his mouth. Miss Kelly goes over to comfort him and he continues to scream. Well, here's the consequence. Maybe you're noticing the pattern. Stan is escorted to the nurse and his mom is called. And then I'm guessing there's a weekend here because the 8th and 9th aren't listed. On the 10th, the antecedent, Stan gets in line to go home, but Miss Kelly tells him to sit back at his desk because the bus won't be there for another 10 minutes. His behavior: he pushes past the teacher and waits in the hallway for the bus. Consequence: Miss Kelly keeps the classroom door open so that she can watch him. Okay. Was that all clear? That makes sense what this data, this is very thorough data, by the way. You don't have to take data like this. The only reason why it's so thorough is because we're not living in the experience with Stan, so the book wanted you to have all the detail. Okay, great. So did you notice any patterns? And I can scroll up and down because I know that these 6 data points are on different pages. Maybe I can zoom out a little bit. Would that help? I don't know if you can. It's hard to see. I can put the link to this in the chat. That could help too. Or maybe you've noticed some patterns already. Anything with the consequences? that like something consistently showing up for him? Like what kinds of consequences is he getting? Adults are being called. Yep. Stan seems to be reacting to things that he's not happy about. So that those are the antecedents. Or involve transitions from one activity, another antecedent. That's a pattern. Every time he does something, he is removed from the room. Those are the consequences. Okay, so let's look at, well, the information is down here. Uh, that this stuff was tallied. Can you see? Don't go. Okay. Can you see at the bottom of the screen where it says antecedents, like types of antecedents and how they're tallied, and then types of consequences and how they're tallied? So, like I think it was Moniz said, I'm going to look at consequences. There, each time, all 6 times, he's removed in some way, or someone is removed. Um, so he's there's 6 times each time that happened. And then with the antecedents over here, I mean, like there were 3 transitions, which is kind of a pattern, right? It's not as blatant as the 6 consequences here, but yeah, and not getting what he wants, like asked to wait 2 times. Um, and also like indoor recess might be not getting what he wants as well. Um, so given this information, this analysis of the data, what would you conclude? Like, what do you think the function of his behavior is? Is he trying to get attention? Is he trying to escape from the demand or the situation, like avoiding? Is he trying to access tangible? Do you think there's a sensory component or a physiological combination? Okay. Someone says, I feel like there's a combo, but it seems like a sensory component to me. And someone else says, it seems to be avoidance. All right. So I'm curious. This is hard on the webinar because usually I'm like a very interactive instructor, so it's hard for me. I would love to hear more about why both of you said what you said, the sensory and the avoidance. Um, but I don't. You're not expected to do that. Um, there's also I don't know. I feel like there's a physiological component on the day that he didn't take his medication. But there were other days where he did take the medication and there was still a problem, right? Sensory, I'm reading in the chat. He is being removed to the hallway or away from people in some way. Oh, so it's almost like, correct me if I'm wrong, but the experience in the classroom environment is too much. So but the removal is an avoidance or escape, and perhaps, like you said, it's a combo, like a combo of like too much in the classroom, so I want to get out of it. Like he's escaping from the sensory. Is that what you're saying? I hope I nailed it. Okay, she says yes, that. Okay, yeah, like it's just too much to bear. And he's like, oh, well, if I behave this way, if I hit people or hurt myself, I can leave, right? They're just gonna put me in the hallway or the teacher's gonna leave me alone. That's what I want. Great. So let's see what they wrote at the bottom here. Deep, deep, deep. Come on, computer. Um, so 3 incidents occur. Okay, we kind of already talked about this. He was removed from the class. I'm reading the last paragraph. He was removed from the class on all 6 occasions and subsequently avoided the task, activity, or situation. These observations show that the function of his behavior was probably escape or avoidance. And like Elizabeth said, perhaps there was like a sensory piece that's like pushing him to escape. Someone else says, I suppose it could also be attention because he just had his mother's boyfriend removed from his life. It could be. Like maybe his mom's really struggling and he's not getting as much attention at home. Yeah, we don't know enough about the situation, sadly. Someone says it also seems like is related in some way to changes from what is typical or what he wants. Yeah. So like the mother's boyfriend moving and also like not being on medication is a change. And from what he wants, like in the antecedents, um, these are all these antecedents in some ways are things that he doesn't want. He doesn't want to transition. He doesn't want indoor recess. He doesn't want to wait. um, so he's wanting so he's escaping, maybe. So knowing what we know, which is not a lot, and again, this is like a fictional situation, what would you do to help Stan? So we have the FAIR plan, we have behavior plans, we have contracts, we have reflection sheets. Like, how can we help him with his escape or his avoidance? And this is like the meat of the work, right? Like, okay, we have all this information now. What do we do with it? What do we try? And whatever we try, we need to stick with it for a little bit. Would you like me to put the slides in the chat? I can do that. I know they're going to get shared with you, but I can do that as a reference. Don't look ahead, though. There's only one more slide anyway. Someone says, I feel like this is just the start of a trial and error, so the fair plan seems like a good plan to start. Yeah, like are there any accommodations we might give him from there? Or like teaching of underdeveloped skills? There's no like right or wrong answer here because trial and error, like you said. Um, but knowing what he struggles with and how he reacts with his behavior, what can we do for him? What can we not do for him? That's another question because remember the ABC reinforcement loop, like the consequence of getting removed is actually reinforcing his behaviors, his aggression. So, what should we definitely not do anymore? Okay. Someone says tracking of behaviors seems done, so now it seems like the time for a plan. Yes, that is true. Someone else says, I'd say try to give more warning of transitions. Yep. And talk to him one to one. Stop removing him from the classroom. Create a safe place in the room for him to go. Agree. The removing him is not helping the situation, even though it seems like it's going to, because you don't have to deal with him. It's actually creating more problems. It's making him more aggressive because that's what he wants. Give him that, like our participant said, give him that place to go in the room. Like, let him have a break there instead. Teach him how to ask for a break. Um, I'll give everyone one more minute in case you're typing, and then we can move on to our final slide. And we have someone says, I'd be curious about trying something for avoidance or sensory specific accommodations. Someone else says, maybe have a favorite object in the space for him to calm down. Yeah. And then also, I agree, it seems like he needs some self soothing. Yeah. Because his behaviors are really like intense and they're fast, right? Like it's like he goes from 0 to 100 very quickly. There aren't any warning signs like we talked about in the FAIR plan. Like he's just like immediate aggression. All right, so our last, oh, sorry, I lied. This is not the last slide, but this is just a summary of all the stuff we talked about. So if you can remember this sequence, that would be great. You always want to start with some baseline data, and we have the ABC data, best of your ability to take that. You want to try for 2 weeks or 10 data points. You probably can't get that much because you don't see the students as much. Then once you've got the data, you want to analyze it and determine the function, and if there's an underdeveloped skill, notice patterns and antecedents and consequences. Maybe there's an underdeveloped skill, and what is the student really trying to tell me? Then you choose a consequence. So that could be a behavior plan, that can be reflection sheets, that can be a contract, or something from the FAIR plan, which is like a very comprehensive list of strategies. And then last, we haven't talked about this yet. Once you pick one or two things that you're going to do, stick with it. If it doesn't work the first time, that's okay. But you have to try and be consistent a few times. And if you're like, ugh, this is not working, and you can tell it's making things worse, you can abandon that strategy and try something else. And this is the trial and error it's talking about. Okay, so there's a lot of text on the slide, and I'm so sorry about that because like I don't like when there's a lot of text on the slide, but I wanted to make sure that the emotions and behaviors were like next to each other so you could see and compare. So no, we cannot treat emotions the way we manage behaviors. Part of the reason why is like emotion, we don't have much control over our emotions. Like we're not like choosing to feel anxious. We're not choosing to be angry. We can learn strategies to deal with them, but the way that we deal with students, any human deals with emotions, is not the same way that we deal with behaviors. So with emotions, and like I said, like anxiety, anger, sadness, like all the basic emotions that are hard to regulate once a student gets there. Here are some things that you can do. Validate your students' feelings. Yeah, like I get that you feel that way, and try to understand them. Why they're feeling that way. Maybe the source of the emotions is because they haven't learned any coping skills yet. It's not necessarily your job or my job to teach coping skills, really, but knowing that maybe they have a deficit in that area could help you. Oops, help you help them in some way. Oh, directly. That's so funny. Directly teach coping skills and strategies. It's not necessarily your job. Maybe you want to do that. It's up to you. Like teaching kids how to cope with their emotions. Music is a really great regulator. So sometimes just listening to a certain song can snap a student out of whatever it is that they're going through. Playing an instrument, oh my God, such a great way to regulate. Hopefully students that have these, like if they have an emotional disability or they have trauma, or hopefully they're seeing a guidance counselor or a social worker at your school. Help them practice ways to express the emotions in a healthy manner. So, like all the emotions are okay, but you can't be a jerk to someone else, like you can't express your emotions by being mean or screaming at someone. So how can we express how we're feeling without it, hurting someone else? Maybe students just need to sit with their emotions in this quiet, safe space. Just let the dust settle. Social stories. I love social stories. I'm going to show you a couple. And then there's something called the Zones of Regulation, which is a curriculum for younger students. I've used it with some 7th and 8th grade, like parts of it, that helps students with regulation. So again, people do not have complete control over their emotions. So in the word consequate isn't an actual word, but it's like the verb to give a consequence. So we cannot consequate them for having feelings. And I have done this. I thought that a student was acting out of choice, and I gave them a behavior plan, and oh my God, did they feel like more like a failure than they already did. So I kind of made the situation worse. So you just really need to be careful. Like and I don't have a way to I don't have a data sheet to determine if it's an emotion or like a behavior. Like I really don't. It's usually just knowing my student well enough. It's an intuition. Um, Let me show you. Did you learn about social stories in a previous webinar in this study group? Because if you already did, I don't need to. I'm not going to show you again. Oh no. Okay, great. So, oh, I love social stories. They can work for both behaviors and emotions. Let's see. Okay, so here's one for a student who was taking piano lessons at the conservatory, or sorry, at Berkeley, and like would get very emotionally distraught when she made a mistake. So perfectionism is a type of anxiety. So I covered up her face here because just to maintain confidentiality. So we used to be part of the Boston Conservatory, and then there was the merger many years ago. So that's why it says Boston Conservatory here. So a social story is written in the perspective, the point of view of the student. So you're going to use the pronouns I, me, my, we, us. And you want to try to write it in the way that they speak. So this one worked like a charm for her. Like, I don't know, it was almost like magical how quickly it worked. So I like to play the piano. It's fun to come to Boston Conservatory and have lessons with Jen. And so I took a picture of the student. It's nice to have pictures of them on there. And it's just a picture of her smiling. And then sometimes when I play the piano, I make mistakes. It does not feel good to make mistakes. I feel frustrated when I make mistakes. So I had her pretend to make a mistake, and told her to make a frustrated face. And then here's her instructor. But it's normal to make mistakes. Even Jen, who is really amazing piano player, makes mistakes. That's okay. Jen just fixes her mistakes, and she feels better. Fixing mistakes is a great way to learn. When Jen fixes her mistakes, she feels happy. This will make her an even better piano player. So if I make a mistake, I will fix it and keep on playing. This way I will learn and become an even better piano player. Jen thinks I do a very good job during the piano lesson. Jen is very proud of me even when I make mistakes. I'm a good piano player and will keep doing a good job. So, and then I printed it out and they read it, and maybe she wanted to read it a couple more times, but it worked. The teacher found me and was like, "Oh my God, the student made a mistake and she was fine." But she used to kind of like have these meltdowns about it. So that worked really well for her. And you can also make social stories for behaviors. It's hard to click. So this was a student who was having trouble with classroom expectations. So we made this social story. Okay. So one of them, and he helped me write this story. So like the words that are the font that's larger is my writing, and everything else that's smaller is his writing. So stay in seat. In every class, I will sit down in my seat. If I need to get up, I will ask my teacher. So I took a picture of him sitting down. He came up with this strategy to sit on his hands, like, and this is the kid with the sensory stuff. So I think that was like a double. What's the word? Not double whammy, but it served two purposes. Um, Stay on task. And then he wrote, in every class, I will stay on task by focusing. If I notice I am off task, I will try to be more focused next time. Um, Follow directions. So here I am giving a direction. Anytime a teacher gives me a direction, I will follow them. I will try to follow the steps. And then be kind. So I'm not going to read through all of this, of course. And then there was like this conclusion slide about all seventh graders and what the expectations are. And that really helped him too. I don't know, like most social stories are effective. So I loved that. And then zones of regulation, I'm not going to go into, but I've linked also in the speaker notes here if you're curious a little bit about what that is. So how we manage behaviors is on the right side. Loading. Okay, So as we know, behavior plans, contracts, and reflection sheets are strategies that could work. You can invite the student to be part of designing the plan and the contract or the social story like we just saw. Directly teach the underdeveloped skill and model appropriate behavior. So like social stories for the classroom expectations. Teach replacement behaviors. And negative punishment, if a student's wasting time in your class and not doing what they're supposed to do, you can have them make up missed time. But again, you need to like talk to an administrator about that. That does work most of the time. And be consistent. Don't change things up. Follow through. So if you tell a student, if like I can't stand when teachers are like, if you do that again, then I'm gonna XYZ. And then the teacher doesn't follow through with the XYZ. And it's just like creating more of a problem because the student's like, well, I can do this. They're not gonna follow through on that. So it's really important that if you give like a warning of a consequence, that you do give the consequence. Um, and make sure your consequences are expected and predictable. You don't want to surprise a student with a consequence. You want to make sure they know, like, look, like, if you do this again, this is going to be the consequence. So now you know. And, like, try to live in the positive reinforcement area if you can. Because that's going to help with your relationship building with the student too, and it's going to help them feel better about themselves. And again, with behavior, challenging behavior, there's an element of choice. So we can consecrate students for challenging behavior. And that is it. Thank you very much. So we have like a minute left. Are there any questions, any comments? And if not, no worries. We can say goodbye, but I want to give everyone a minute to if they have anything they want to say. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, you two, for being part of the webinar. And anyone else who watches it later, have a great day. Bye.